Good evening and welcome to the Gospel Truth. I'm Alan Jackson, bringing to you spiritual songs and hymns and the power of the spoken word of God. First of all, giving thanks to God Almighty for blessing me with this another outpouring of His tender love and mercy, and that He's allowed me once again to be on this the time side of life and have this another blessed privilege to come to you in His name by way of this television medium, and to bring to you another message from His holy and divine word. And as I always do, I'd like to continue to express my appreciation to the production staff for their continued service to the gospel truth. It's my prayer that God will continue to bless him with those things that He knows that he's standing in need of as well. And then, of course, I'm praying on your behalf as participant observers. And it is my prayer that God will continue to bless you and your family with all of those things that He knows that you're standing in need of as well. And I'm encouraging you to pray on my behalf because I'm also standing in need of prayer, and it's only God who can provide me with those things that I'm standing in need of. Well, I certainly want to welcome you to the program as we continue in this February, the month Black American History Month, and is celebrating 100th year of Black History Months. So we're going to continue this evening featuring Dr. Attorney Fred Gray in the case Alabama versus King. This is the trial that launched the civil rights movement. So tonight you will have part one. And Lord willing, next week you will have part two. So right now, without any further remarks, part one.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Steve Murray. I'm director here at the Department of Archives and History, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the archives for today's Food for Thought program. Let me ask you to pause for a moment and pull out your cell phone. Go ahead and silence that device to be sure it doesn't ring during the course of today's program. Well, you're in for a treat today. Montgomery native Fred Gray graduated from what is now Alabama State University in 1951. He was encouraged by an instructor there to attend law school, and he enrolled at what is now Case Western Reserve University School of Law in Ohio, and then returned to Montgomery upon his graduation. Mr. Gray is an ordained minister. He served as one of the first African-American lawmakers to be elected in Alabama since Reconstruction after passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. He was the first African-American president of the Alabama State Bar. He holds the highest awards given by a number of organizations, including the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the American Bar Association. And he holds a significant number of honorary degrees, including from the University of Alabama and Princeton University. On July 7, 2022, President Joe Biden bestowed upon Mr. Gray the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his contributions as a legal architect of the civil rights movement and a lifelong champion of justice. And we are honored to be able to display the Presidential Medal of Freedom in our lobby here, just down the hall for the past few months. If you did not see that on your way into the building today, I encourage you to stop and see it after the program. I want you to think for a moment about the fact that Fred Gray turned 25 years old a week after the beginning of the Montgomery bus boycott. Think about what you were doing when you were 25 years old. We have 7 decades later, we have the extraordinary opportunity not to hear from someone who is not just a witness to those events, but the legal architect of the arguments that carried that movement forward in Montgomery in 1955 and 56, and for years later, and for 7 decades, has been a champion of justice, working for his community and his state, making this a better place for all of us. One of my favorite facts I have 2 favorite facts about Fred Gray. One of them is that he shares his birthday with the state of Alabama, December 14th. I think about him every year. My second favorite fact about Fred Gray is that he's been a member of the Board of Trustees here at the Archives since 2003. So he is part of the board that provides overall governance and leadership to this institution. And I am sure grateful for the opportunity to call him a boss and a friend. Please welcome Fred Gray.
Thank you very much, Steve. He does an excellent job as the Executive Director of the Alabama Department of Archives and History. Let's give him and his staff a hand. I appreciate the invitation. I want to specifically thank Ms. Thomas for when you get to be 92, you don't drive like you used to. And she came up to Tuskegee to bring me here, and I'm very happy. I want to express appreciation to her for what she does and what she did for me in bringing me here today. My wife, Carol, who I hope is listening and looking at this program today, is not here because she's recovering from rotator cuff surgery that she incurred, unfortunately, when we were coming from an event down in Miami. We both are second marriages. I'd been married to one person for over 40 years. She had been married to her husband for over 30 years. We were introduced by a mutual friend at a church event, and we have been married now for 22 years, and I want to thank her and sorry that she should not be here. This is a very unusual event for me. I don't know whether I have ever been asked to speak at an audience where I had a former governor of the state here. We're good to have Governor Silverman, and I think former Secretary of State. And we're thankful for each one of you who have come here today. Some time ago, I was already invited to accept the invitation to speak here today. The invitation was later confirmed by an email which referred to this lecture as the Food for Thought lecture. I was also asked to have available the books I had authored or co-authored, Bus Ride to Justice, my autobiography, the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, and Alabama versus King, co-authored with Dan Abram and David Fisher. And I understand those books have been made available to you. Two of them are now out of print, Bus Ride to Justice and the Tuskegee Syphilis Study. We have a new publisher, and if you decide you want some of those other than the ones that they may have here, just let us know and we'll be able to do it. When I realized, when I got this invitation, that is a part of Black History Month, and realizing the racial problems which still exist in this country involving African Americans, Asian, and other minorities, I thought I must mention the fact that this is Black History Month and quote from an opinion written by Emma McElver Talbot, appearing in the Courier Journal, February 9th, 23 edition, and it kind of expressed my thoughts, and I thought I'd share it with you. And it's about Black History Month. Black History Month is a time to pause and to reflect on the survivals and the amazing accomplishments that Black people have made and continue to make going forward. It would be easy to give up on life in times like these. How easy it would be to bury our heads in the sand. And as we witness the madness of neighborhood villains of every race and stripe, and police officers, criminal politicians, and legislators setback. That's the end of the quote. I thought also that it would be appropriate to talk about the book co-authored with Dave Abram and David Fisher, because it tells the story of what African Americans did here in Montgomery, Alabama in 1995 and 1955 and 1956, when we were confronted with serious problems on the buses. We did not bury our heads in the sand. We just refused to ride the city buses in Montgomery, which resulted in the beginning of what many authors call the Civil Rights Movement, and made changes around the world. And guess what? It all started on buses here in Montgomery, Alabama. Give yourselves a hand. Looking back, 68 years after my admission to the bar, I never imagined at the time I represented Claudette Colvin, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph Abernathy, the NAACP, the plaintiffs in Gormillion versus Lightfoot, the men in the infamous Tuskegee syphilis study, the Freedom Riders, the Selma to Montgomery marches, and the plaintiffs in the case that desegregated the schools in Alabama from kindergarten through the universities, that I would ever be invited to co-author with Dan Abram and David Fisher, who are award-winning authors, in writing a book, Alabama versus Martin Luther King. However, it happened. That has been the history of my life, helping to make the impossible possible. When I was approached by them to co-author this book, I was surprised, shocked, astonished, and didn't really believe it would happen. But guess what? It happened. I did not set out to play a role in history. I was just determined to first change the laws in Alabama governing segregation. And as I grew up in Montgomery, Alabama in the late 1940s and 1950s, I came to understand the promises of Americans, where the promise of America were being denied to African Americans like me, solely because of our color and our skin. I knew what the U.S. Constitution said. I knew what the Alabama law said, and I knew for sure that they were not the same. They were different. As I was sitting in the back of buses going back and forth from across the city of Montgomery to what is now Alabama State University, I decided I was going to be a lawyer in Alabama, and I was going to fight segregation anywhere, anytime, and I was going to do that for the rest of my life. And I've tried to do that now for 68 years. My goal was to destroy segregation wherever I found it. At the time I wanted to become a lawyer, I couldn't attend the University of Alabama Law School. But the southern states, in order to keep African Americans from attending graduate schools and professional school at the statewide institutions, they provided out-of-state aid. And I used that out-of-state aid in order to become a lawyer in Alabama. Segregation was and is insidious. It poisons every aspect of African Americans' life. It was designed and applied not simply to control actions, but perhaps more importantly, to create a mindset of inferiority that would limit one's dreams. My mother fought every day of her life for her 5 children, and she died at the age of 97. But she taught the 5 of us and told us we could be anything we wanted to be if we did 3 things. 1, keep Christ first in your life. 2, stay in school and get a good education. And 3, stay out of trouble. I'll try to do all 3. I don't know exactly why I believe that I could rely upon the law to change the laws in order to fight segregation when the law had been used for so long to make segregation legal. But I did, with a lot of help along the way. I always did, perhaps because we had no other weapons. However, my religious background and my ministerial training gave me the faith and courage that I needed. When I started out practicing law, I had no specific plan as to how I was going to fight for civil rights. When I opened my law office in 1954, there was no national unified civil rights movement. There was no national unified African American leaders. My primary concern at that time was to figure out how I was going to get some clients, because you couldn't advertise, lawyers couldn't like they do now, and pay the $50 a month rent for my office upstairs over Sears at 113 Monroe Street. At that time, there were only one other African American lawyer in Montgomery, Charles Langford, who later became my law partner and who himself had only been practicing law for 1 year. However, I was fortunate enough to be guided by some smart, very determined people within the African American community in Montgomery. Today, many of them are represented by statues and plaques throughout the city and some throughout the country. At that time, they were just flesh and blood, just like the rest of the African Americans in Montgomery. But they were willing to risk their lives and livelihood in order to obtain equal justice. Many of them are well known, and you've heard of their names, and some of you know some of them. E.D. Nixon, Rufus Lewis, Joanne Robinson, Rosa Parks, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rev. Abernathy, and John Lewis, for examples. There were others, and so many of the mostly forgotten people mentioned in the pages of Alabama versus King, who stood up when it was not safe and not easy to do so. As I think back, my first civil rights case was representing 15-year-old Claudette Colvin in March of 1955, who had been arrested for refusing to give up her seat on a bus to a white person as required by the Montgomery City Ordinance. I was recommended to her parents by E.D. Nixon. Claudette Colvin attended some of Mrs. Rosa Parks' NAACP youth meetings. She was youth director and secretary of the Montgomery branch of the NAACP. She was a real fighter. Mrs. Parks and I had become good friends, perhaps because she understood the community movement would need good young African American lawyers. For months, we met for lunch pretty much almost every day, so that when she was arrested on December 1st, 1955, for violating the same ordinance that Claudette Colvin, she was well prepared. That day was our last luncheon meeting. The result of her arrest and the subsequent conviction was the mass protests remembered in history as the Montgomery bus boycott. Many historians regarded that as the beginning of the civil rights movement. I was right there in the middle of it, and so were some of you. When 89 African-American Montgomery residents were arrested for violating an ordinance against organized boycotts, each of them named me as their defense attorney. Rather than holding 89 separate trials, we accepted the county solicitor's request that we begin with a single trial to determine an outcome that might be applicable in all of the other cases. The solicitor selected Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to be that person tried because he had become really the spokesman for the movement. This was the first civil rights trial of Dr. King's career. When it began, no one, absolutely no one, understood how important it would be in history. That's why you don't have very many pictures of what took place at that first trial. They have a few. I was a young African-American Montgomeryan. I knew from experience not to have any great expectations about obtaining justice on a local level. Even that early in what was to evolve into the national movement, it was my belief that our victories in the war against legal segregation would come on the federal level, and that's where I intended to make my fight in the federal court. This trial, Alabama versus King, began as just another step on a long climb to the promised land of justice for all. And we haven't reached that promised land yet. The county solicitor believed it would not take long to convict Dr. King. The result would serve as a warning to the rest of the African Americans in the community about what was going to happen if they didn't end this protest. While I didn't have much hope of victory, I intended to make the good fight. I knew every African American lawyer in the state of Alabama. I had visited at the invitation of Attorney Thurgood Marshall and with his assistant, Robert Carter, at the NAACP office in New York in December of 1955 when I was retained to represent the people in the bus boycott. And I knew that Alabama would have the best lawyers money could buy. And I knew I would be no match. So I talked to them. They promised me not only to help in connection with the bus boycott, but they would help me in all the other cases so that we could destroy segregation wherever we found, and that continued. Mr. Marshall assigned Robert Carter to assist in Dr. King's defense. I was able to put together an extraordinary team of experienced African-American lawyers, including Arthur Shaw as the Dean of Black Lawyers and my mentor, Peter Hall and Ozell Billingsley. I was the youngest member of the team.
I'm Alan Jackson, and I'm inviting you to join us again next week, if it's God's will, when the Gospel Truth will once again come your way, bringing to you spiritual songs and hymns and the power of the spoken word of God. Until then, it's my prayer that God will continue to bless you and your family and to keep you all safe.